Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to talk about The Door-to-Door Bookstore by Carsten Henn, translated from the German by Melody Shaw. This is a story set in a small German town following our main character, the 72-year-old Karl Kohlhoff. He used to work full-time at his local The City Gate bookshop, but now at the age of 72 spends his time walking door-to-door to different customers, delivering specially curated books to a handful of very dedicated, loyal customers who particularly rely on Karl for his very exact recommendations that just seem to hit on precisely what they want. It's a lovely initial premise, but you very quickly get the sense that even though Karl does care about these people, he goes to see them every day and does interact with them, that each of these people are still pretty isolated and Karl only really knows them on quite a surface level. For example, Karl assigns each of his customers a different fictional name, such as Mrs. Longstocking, Mr. Darcy. One of his customers he just refers to as the reader, which kind of hints that while he does care about these people, he's still somewhat detached from them, and not knowing their real names never gets to know them on a personal level. One evening while Karl is at books, he ends up bumping into this rather precocious but very perceptive 9-year-old called Shasha. She is incredibly curious about Karl and his book deliveries and takes it upon herself to join him, however much he may be resisting it. And now the 72-year-old Karl has this little 9-year-old tagging along with him on his journey to deliver books to his different customers. They are really quite a contrasting pair. Karl, this very quiet, unassuming old man who is very set in his routines, next to Shasha, who is incredibly sharp and perceptive, very confident and lively. And slowly but surely, as he comes to know more about her and starts to enjoy her company, she starts to point him to how he is kind of falling short in his community and how maybe he needs to start seeing his customers as actual people rather than just these literary avatars, even going as far as to deliver her own different books to the ones that Karl has picked out, suggesting to Karl that maybe the regular picks that he's always gone to are not quite hitting home with his customers. Maybe the reads that he's picking up for them are giving them what they want, but not necessarily what they need. Through Shasha, he gets to know more about what his customers' lives are actually like, the different struggles that they go through, and starting to think of ways that he might be able to actually help them. Realizing that as glorious as books are, as much comfort as they can give you, books can only offer so much and don't always address the very real human pains that we're going through. Sometimes you need outside forces to step in, sometimes you need community. While this is going on, Karl's job becomes more tenuous at the bookshop that he works for. The new store manager, Sabine, is the daughter of the previous owner, and she really sees Karl as being a relic of the past, and his position as the book walker, hand delivering books to his various customers, as being incredibly impractical despite the community function that it provides. And Sabine is increasingly hostile throughout the book towards Karl. It's the second time within a month that I have read a book where the child of a previous bookstore owner takes over the business and really starts to run it into the ground, really losing all of the warmth and the character that the bookshop originally had, because they're so focused on the business side that they start to lose the heart of what the company stands for. The first of those being Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood, and now The Door-to-Door Bookstore. And in comparing the two, arguably Sabine is a more complex character than Rewitched's Christopher, who is basically your blueprint raging misogynist, wants to get rid of the baked goods, the cafe area, and wants to replace all the cozy displays of books with non-fiction about CEOs. And he is a character who really doesn't change very much. But to be honest, I would argue that Christopher is probably a more engaging character because we actually get some sort of resolution with him. And he as a character, I feel like, even though he's a bit of a caricature, is a bit more defined than Sabine. Sabine kind of feels like a weak antagonist throughout this book. She's not a purely malicious figure. There is definitely some complexity to her relationship with Karl and her father's bookshop, but I never really got a good sense of her actual motives. I didn't feel like we got much resolution with her in the end, and so I just didn't feel like she had quite as much of an impact. I do think this book explores some really pertinent themes that will really appeal to readers. You know, to start off with, we do have the role of literature, the power of a good book in raising your spirits, but as we get further on into the book, we really see that this book is tackling themes of loneliness, isolation, the importance of community. Each of Karl's customers have something that they are struggling with, from the mild to the serious. Karl himself has become very isolated in his own little routine, but never wanting to be too vulnerable. So all of the relationships that he's cultivated with his customers, you know, they are there, but they're incomplete. They're not very deep. But through the course of the book, through Shasha's interventions, his connections to these people become more real and more vulnerable. And he makes more of an effort with people and has to learn that stepping outside of his comfort zone is the only real way to grow. Through the relationship that Karl has with Sabine, you're also getting to see some rather ageist treatment of Karl. People, as they reach a certain age, being kind of forced into obsolescence, even when they have so much to give. And once again, by the end of this book, the community has to come to Karl to make him realise his value and that he is very much needed and very much loved within his community. It's a very sweet story, and I can see this appealing to a lot of people, but I do have some criticism of this story. I don't think Henn's writing is without its limitations, and I do feel like there are are certain subplots within this book that are handled kind of poorly and with a bit less nuance. There is a domestic violence subplot within this book. We realise very quickly that one of Carl's customers is very much being abused by her husband. And while Carsten Henn does very much show that this is a serious thing, I also didn't really feel like it was resolved particularly well and lacked the sensitivity that I think the topic of domestic violence really needs. It's very much suggested in this book that the character who is suffering through domestic violence, that it is on her to make the decision to leave her husband rather than interventionary measures, kind of suggesting the community can only do so much and it's on the individual victim to actually do anything about it, which kind of felt at odds with the rest of the book. I would also say that violence just generally isn't handled very well in this book. Carl himself is the victim of a physical altercation at one point in the book, and it is very serious, and yet there are no actual consequences and repercussions as a result of this violence. The character who perpetrated the violence, it just kind of gets swept under the rug that he assaulted an old man. Two slightly smaller examples of violence, such as Shasha, she goes to school and is repeatedly telling Carl about this young boy on the playground who is picking on her, who is pushing her around and bullying her. And Carl comes out with the age-old suggestion that maybe the reason that this boy is picking on her and pushing her around is that he actually likes her. And Carl, I feel, is never properly pushed back on that suggestion. And I found that especially jarring considering the domestic violence subplot that follows, which Shasha is privy to. She sees this going on, and yet she's also being taught by her elders that it's okay if a boy pushes you around because it just means that he likes you. I don't know, I didn't like it. I found it very clumsy and just seemed really at odds with the rest of the book. Similarly, the ending, while it is very sweet and we do get back to this community spirit, does feel quite rushed. I feel like where Carl is at the last few pages of this book, his ending just needed a little bit more time, a little bit more resolution. Everything just seemed to be handed to him and I just found it a little bit thoughtless. Generally, I feel like this book is really adept at cultivating this really cozy, charming atmosphere and characters who you very quickly come to root for. And that feeling carried on for quite a few pages, but then as we got to the last third, just ended up getting a bit sloppy. It's kind of like Carsten Henn was struggling to fully resolve these characters' conflicts. Ultimately, I would say that this is a really endearing book. I think it's definitely going to find people who love it. You know, it's definitely a book for those of us who love reading, who love books, but can sometimes find that maybe the stories that we're reading, the characters that we're reading about, do not necessarily map out to real life people and real life troubles that we come up against. Books can only do so much, but we actually do have to face our real lives eventually. And in that way, it's kind of a bittersweet story. It's a love letter to books that also acknowledges literature's shortcomings when it comes to actually facing the real world. It isn't perfect, but it might be just what you're in the mood for. So there we go. Those are all of my thoughts on The Door-to-Door Bookstore by Carsten Henn, translated by Melody Shaw. Do let me know if you've read this book, what your thoughts were on it. Alternatively, do let me know about any books, about the importance of reading that you particularly enjoy. Always love one of those, and I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.